Good morning. Just last test. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Just let me know how this sounds. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks. On. On, and then again, turn it off.
The committee will come to order. 3 years ago, I was proud to join members of this committee to help lead a coalition of Democrats and Republicans to pass a historic new investment in our nation's infrastructure. Since then, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, has begun to make a difference in communities all across our country. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law didn't just give us the chance to fix our roads and bridges. It has also expanded access to high-speed internet, upgraded railroads and airports, delivered clean water to countless families, and made critical progress in the fight for a clean energy economy. Those investments have already made an impact here in Michigan. So far, this legislation has funded more than 500 individual projects. And I've seen these benefits firsthand and heard from constituents who are grateful for these resources. Our airports, from Detroit to Lansing to the UP, have received funding to improve and expand their services. Our communities are building the electric vehicle charging stations that will power the future of clean transportation. And across our state, increased access to high-speed internet is providing Michiganders with new opportunities for education, healthcare, and innovation. And those investments have created thousands of good-paying jobs, and I would say union jobs across Michigan. Today, we will focus on the investments in our surface transportation, maritime, port and freight infrastructure, and the impact that they've had across our state. In Bay City, the Lafayette Avenue Bridge is getting replaced after almost 85 years. Probably time for a new bridge after 85 years. No more piecemeal repairs. Instead, the Bay City community is going to get a brand new bridge that will bolster its local economy. In Detroit, MDOT is building a mobility and innovation corridor to drive innovation in transit and vehicle technologies. The city has received historic investments to make roads safer. New trails for pedestrians are being built as part of the Joe Louis Greenway, and the I-375 freeway is getting replaced with a boulevard at street level. In Detroit, Menominee, Monroe, and the Sioux Locks, key Great Lakes ports have begun to receive the support they need to shore up our supply chain, boost thank you, Captain, boost local economies, and strengthen our maritime infrastructure. I can tell you're ready for your testimony. In Kalamazoo, Pontiac, Sault Ste. Marie, and Jackson, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law's RAISE grant program has kickstarted new projects that will improve pedestrian safety and access, transform downtowns, and reconstruct critical roads. And right here in Lansing, resources are going to projects to improve I-496 and US 127 to improve communities and connectivity to the rest of the state. These are just a few of the projects funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that we'll examine at this morning's hearing, and more are breaking ground each and every day. These projects aren't just building new infrastructure, but they're also improving public health, economic development, the future of clean energy, and so much more. And we're just beginning to see the full effect of this legislation. That's why our work is far from over. The next step is to understand the details of how this law has been actually implemented. And we want to hear directly from local stakeholders, the people who are on the ground seeing these projects up front and close. This won't just allow us to better utilize resources of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, but it'll also lay the groundwork for future legislation and help us understand where we are still falling short. Perhaps most important, Michigan is exactly the right place to examine these questions. Our state has rural, urban, and suburban areas that each face their own unique challenges in meeting Michigan's infrastructure needs. And as a hub of domestic manufacturing, our state's industries serve millions of individual customers and play a critical role in protecting our national interest. The strategic supply chains that run through Michigan rely on road, rail, and maritime infrastructure to deliver each and every day. And as Great Lakes State with an international border, our maritime infrastructure is among the most critical in North America for trade and for commerce. And there is no state more fitting than ours to hold the Senate Commerce Committee's first hearing on the implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. This morning, our panel of expert witnesses will share essential insights into this legislation. They'll help us understand how it must be implemented to meet infrastructure needs here in Michigan, as well as all across the country. So I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today, and I certainly look forward to a very productive conversation. Our first witness is Brad Wiefrecht. Mr. Wiefrecht serves as the director of the Michigan Department of Transportation. He has served the department for nearly 30 years in several capacities, most recently as the Chief Operations Officer and Chief Engineer. Mr. Wiefrecht also serves on the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials Board of Directors and represents MDOT on the Council on Future Mobility and Electrification and its Michigan's board and ITS Michigan Board of Directors and the Mackinac Bridge Authority. He is also a fellow Spartan. Go Green. Knew I'd get that response here at Lansing. Very good. Mr. Wiefrecht, welcome. Welcome to today's subcommittee field hearing. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Good morning, Chairman Peters. Go White. And on behalf of the men and women of the Michigan Department of Transportation, working every day to provide safe passage for travelers, whether they're driving a car or a truck, or whether they're a passenger on a train or a plane or a bus, or riding a bike or walking. You know, I just want to express our sincere appreciation to you for making a point to spotlight these important issues. Excuse me. You've long been a champion for transportation across all modes, and your decades of advocacy as a lawmaker at the state and federal levels have helped our fellow citizens immeasurably. So the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, has been a boon for Michigan in many ways. Not only is the additional IIJ highway funding anticipated to support roughly 6,000 new jobs annually over 5 years, but the program has also helped us to offset the impact of inflation in materials and labor that were spurred by global events, obviously most notably being the worst pandemic in a century. The highway funds for Michigan amount to almost $8 billion total. Roughly $2.2 billion of that is new highway funding, which works out to about $430 million new dollars in an average annual increase. And that's over the fiscal years of 2022 to 2026. Among other highlights related to surface transportation in the IIJA, this does create a new $27.5 billion bridge program that'll help Michigan replace, rehabilitate, and preserve its critical bridge infrastructure. It also creates new discretionary grant programs and increases existing discretionary grant programs, which Michigan's been quite successful in achieving, and will continue to look for how these grants can bolster our program. It also establishes new highway funding programs to support resiliency. This will help states adapt and mitigate the impacts of climate change on the state's transportation network. Overall, the IIJA provides 5 years of certainty and planning and makes it possible for MDOT to implement $1 billion in additional projects over the 5 years of the authorization. And we all know that some transportation projects can take many years to bring from the planning table through to construction. And really having that predictable, sustainable funding source is vital to our planning processes. I'm especially excited about the discretionary grants that have or will benefit some crucial projects that MDOT would otherwise struggle to fund. Governor Whitmore was very forward-thinking in establishing the Michigan Infrastructure Office as well to provide key support to all state departments and local entities in applying for these grants, not only just for transportation, but to expand broadband services, improve water and wastewater systems, many other services across the state. So for the department specifically, a couple of things that were mentioned, but not limited to, obviously, is $105 million that we received for I-375 in Detroit. Spur Freeway that is built below grade. We're going to raise that up, make it an at-grade boulevard, be able to provide some vital community connections for the neighborhoods. $73 million you mentioned for the Lafayette Bridge in Bay City, but in addition, $14 million to revitalize West Bay Shore Drive in Traverse City to help us with traffic congestion and safety. We're adding a roundabout at the busy intersection of M22 and M72. Another $12 million grant to redesign and replace a pump station on 28th Street in Grand Rapids, which is a vital, busy commercial corridor. And again, those are just some of the highlights that we're able to use these discretionary grants to improve quality of life across our state. We're also pleased to pleased the IIJA has had an infusion of $5 billion for states to build out the charging networks as electric vehicles become more common. Michigan will have $110 million through fiscal year 2026. So funding from the program is also benefiting passenger rail, it's benefiting transit, it's benefiting aviation and maritime travel and movement of all commercial goods. And in short, Mr. Chairman, I cannot overstate my appreciation for the IIJ funds and ongoing support of the federal government in helping me and my team deliver on our promise to provide safe and efficient mobility for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Efreck. Thank you, and thank you for your leadership on all of those issues. It's always great working with you, not just today, but every day on all of these projects. Our second witness is Captain Paul Lamar, the director of the Port of Monroe and president of the Great Lakes Pilot Association. Captain Lamar is a third-generation Great Lakes mariner and is a well-known leader and tugboat captain across Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway navigation system. He has served as the port director of the Port of Monroe since 2012 and is directly responsible for the port's growth into a national example of seaport revival as well as redevelopment. Captain Lamar is also the president of the American Great Lakes Port Association, which represents all U.S. Great Lakes ports and is regarded as one of the industry's leading trade associations. Captain Lamar, always a pleasure to see you, and welcome. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure. And I actually have the pleasure of towing ships through that Lafayette Street Bridge, so glad to hear that that's going to be upgraded. First, Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for this opportunity. We've had the opportunity to sit in many meetings, in many rooms where you have fought for not just the Port of Monroe, but have been one of the champions of the Great Lakes as a whole. I consider you a friend. I consider you really one of the true champions of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system. Anytime I can be in the same room with you, I consider it a true honor. And as it relates to infrastructure, I speak to you today, not just from the Port of Monroe, not just as a Michigander, not just representing all of the U.S. ports, but as a third-generation mariner whose families relied upon this industry for over 100 years. And I consistently tell my team at the Port of Monroe that while we all do our very best in our jobs every day, there is one thing at the port and through the system that will outlast all of us and that will span generations, and that is infrastructure. You cannot go wrong investing in infrastructure, particularly our marine highways. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system is the vein of industry that has fed a growing nation since the early 1900s. The infrastructure bill itself, for the first time in a long time, really gave legitimacy to ports and what we do. And ports, the Great Lakes in particular, needs to be seen as a single port in competition with the coast. And the investment in the infrastructure bill and what it has allowed us to accomplish with future investment in the Port of Monroe is a great example of how we can do better in the future. I would tell you, with the Port Infrastructure Development Program and the funds that come along with it, it has been the single most impactful piece of legislation that our community has ever experienced nationwide. I think that the American Association of Port Authorities and others would attest to that. Of course, our business is multimodal. The ports represent the first and last mile and intermodal transportation hubs that connect the major metropolis of our nation. The funding is one piece of this, but the execution undoubtedly is another. And I would say that the efficiency of funding will continue to be important as well, and the streamlined communication between intergovernmental agencies. Another is that we must place value on our American flag fleet and domestic cargo. What we do on the Great Lakes is shipping the raw goods that feed our nation, but that come out of our soil. We are the iron ore that's in your automobile in the form of steel. We're the coal that for at least a period of time is keeping your lights on and contributing to steel production. It's the limestone in your driveway. It's the grain at Kellogg's. It is more homegrown America than any other commodities that are traded throughout the nation. We're looking to diversify our cargoes, but with diversifying, we need to sustain and upgrade aging infrastructure. The last point that I'll make is not just to thank the Biden administration and yourself, but also to thank Secretary Buttigieg, who has, through USDOT, become a real, well, he's from the Great Lakes, of course, but He, just like yourself, has made time to come to the Port of Monroe to visit Michigan to see what we are all about. And what we are all about travels from the committee table at a hearing all the way to the deck plates of a lake freighter and to the concrete that's on our dock and the improvements that we're making that will keep people in Michigan working far after we are no longer involved in this process. I thank you for the honor and the opportunity, and you have my written testimony, which has all the details, I guess we could say. But I appreciate you, sir. You're a Navy brother, and I thank you very much for your confidence.
Thank you, Captain. Thank you for your opening statement. Our third witness is Marty Fitante, who serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Invest UP, the Regional Economic Development Organization of the Upper Peninsula. Before taking over Invest UP in 2019, Mr. Fitante served as the Chief of Staff for Michigan State Senator Tom Casperson. He also previously worked for the Michigan House Policy Office, where he worked on economic, natural resources, and transportation policy issues. Finally, Mr. Fitante has earned degrees from Bay College, Ferris State University, and Wayne State University Law School. Welcome to our committee, and good to see you, and look forward to your opening comments.
Thank you, Senator Peters, and good morning. Appreciate this opportunity to offer a rural Michigan perspective as you examine the impact of the bipartisan infrastructure law on transportation infrastructure and challenges communities like ours have in pursuing such funding. Senator Peters, as you know from touring on your Harley, the UP is not only 1/3 the state's landmass and just 3% of its population, it's also remote. Parts of the UP are closer to 5 other state capitals than we are here today to Lansing. But before offering you some thought on our perspective regionally on the bipartisan infrastructure law, please let me go off script for my written testimony. Despite the distance, I'm pretty sure I just heard my team up in the Upper Peninsula scream, no. Especially Amy Berglund, who you know did great service for Senator Levin over many years. But this may be the most important point I offer. As we celebrate the investments from this act, it's also important, especially today, to celebrate the simple but profound reality of the title of this act, that this was a bipartisan effort. For that, I join all those who are focused on solutions and say thank you. That you helped lead a bipartisan effort here, Senator Peters, is no surprise. And in light of today's political climate, I think it's also important to recognize the nature of your approach, recognition which isn't my own. It is that of the nonpartisan Lugar Center at Georgetown, which named you the second most bipartisan U.S. Senator in 2023. For that, as a constituent, I also say thank you.
That gets a round of applause.
Agreed. The aim of the Lugar Index is to highlight members' willingness to get results, and you have done just that here. Maybe because it was a bipartisan effort, and you've produced results here in the Upper Peninsula. Let me briefly mention just 3. First, a nearly $20 million investment that will reconstruct a critical corridor that connects members of the Sioux tribe and community members throughout the region to essential services. The investment will improve safety for motorists, expand access to essential tribal resources, and establish additional non-motorized nature trails for recreation. Additionally, the Chippewa County International Airport received over $5 million that enabled the development of a brand new general aviation terminal. The new terminal replaced a former Air Force building built by the military prior to the closing of Kinchlow Air Force Base in 1977, and with the rural nature of our area, will undoubtedly be critical to helping strengthen the region's competitive economic position. Lastly, we consider ourselves fortunate and excited to see the city of Menominee, in affiliation with a local transportation and warehousing business, KK Integrated Logistics, receive a $21 million raise grant. This investment will not only transform capacity at the existing site, but it is, among other things, also expected to enhance worker and public safety, reduce harbor and highway congestion, result in a 25% increase in jobs, and revitalize a local economy, an economy that is in direct competition with its neighbor, Wisconsin. However, how important is this investment to the community? Cynthia Cooper, president of KKIL, traveled from Menominee simply to be here with you today. These three examples illustrate how impactful the legislation is to the Upper Peninsula, and I suspect other rural regions. However, speaking of rural communities, taking advantage of the opportunity can be as challenging as this investment is impactful. Rural communities see challenges in not only competing for federal grant opportunities, but applying for, accepting, remaining compliant, tracking, reporting on, and finding the required match. These challenges can often prove fatal. Further, the current federal funding landscape is structured around competitive, one-time awards that tend to further strain the lack of local capacity. That capacity is an issue, is not a surprise when you appreciate what's taken place with our population, both with its decline and its aging. Our three largest age demographics are now between the ages of 55 and 69 in the UP, which is up from 30 to 39-year-olds just 35 years ago. That reality makes attentive and accessible federal staff all the more critical, Senator Peters. And as I saw in the lead up to this testimony through Muriel's efforts, your staff is exceptional. And that starts with Aubrey Moore, who we're fortunate to have manage your district. Finally, Senator Peters, you are well acquainted with the spirit of SISU. It is the foundation of our perseverance in the UP. But rather than simply persevering, rural communities need to prosper. Not a surprise, law school taught me to be long. We believe we are at an intersection in time and poised to grow. In fact, the UP seen population growth for the first time in decades over the last 3 years. But to prosper, we need more friendly federal programming. So thank you, Senator Peters, not only for the opportunity to appear before you today and for the investments of this law that you made in the Upper Peninsula, but also for continuing this conversation in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrante. Thank you. Our fourth witness is Amy O'Leary. Ms. O'Leary is the Executive Director of the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, or SEMCOG, the Metropolitan Planning Organization for that region. She has worked for SEMCOG for 30 years and became E-Day in 2017. Ms. O'Leary also holds leadership positions at the Six Rivers Regional Land Conservancy, the Detroit Area Agency on Aging, and the Executive Directors Council of the National Association of Regional Councils. Ms. O'Leary, thank you for being here. It's great seeing you again. It's always a pleasure working with you. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Peters, and thank you for your support of our infrastructure in Southeast Michigan. So SEMCOG is a regional planning agency serving almost 5 million people in the 7-county area of Metro Detroit. We are a local government association of over 180 members that include counties, cities, villages, and townships. As the Metropolitan Planning Organization, SEMCOG is responsible for ensuring data-driven, efficient use of transportation funds. This includes the development of our 2050 long-range transportation plan for our complex system of roads, bridges, transit, non-motorized transportation, and freight. And it includes $38 billion in transportation projects. We also develop and manage a current list of federally funded projects, which for the years 23 to 26 totals $5.8 billion in federal funds. Today, I'll group my comments into 3 different buckets. Bucket 1, the impact of discretionary grants are transformational. One of the best examples of this are large projects, which exceed the scope of formula funding, including infra raise and the railroad crossing elimination program. For example, Innovate Mound in Macomb County received $98 million through infra to reconstruct 9 miles of roadway to support economic development as the state's defense corridor. The $104 million infra grant to help reconnect one of Detroit's historically Black and economically strong neighborhoods, which was divided and devastated by the highway construction of I-375, as was mentioned earlier. This reconstruction will convert a sunken freeway to a lower speed surface level boulevard. The third project is a $24 million railroad crossing elimination grant program in the city of Monroe. This project will improve response times for emergency vehicles, ease congestion, and increase safety for pedestrians and motorists. These projects are indeed transformational, and we strongly encourage these programs to continue in reauthorization. The need is great. For example, we have over 1,000 at-grade crossings in Southeast Michigan, and when a grade separation needs to occur, the cost is between $20 and $100 million. The good news is that partnerships are happening. Wayne County, in partnership with MDOT and Romulus, Huron Township, and CSX, will be submitting for the separation on Pennsylvania Road, with the state adding millions in match. Discretionary funds are also essential for emerging issues, such as addressing flooding through the PROTECT program and addressing the devastating spike in fatalities on our roadways through the Safe Streets for All program. Safety is one of the several issues best understood and addressed at the local level. We have one fatality a day in Southeast Michigan. Last year, 100 of them were either pedestrians or bicyclists. In response, our region has aggressively pursued funding to tackle this issue, and we received over $80 million in planning and construction funds. Reauthorization of the program should consider this national crisis and move Safe Streets for All to a formula program. The second bucket is the critical role of formula funds. The majority of Southeast Michigan's 25,000 miles of roads and almost 3,000 bridges rely on formula funds. The consistent funding source is essential for implementing advanced planning and data-driven approaches. While discretionary funds have been transformational, time and financial resources, each in short supply for local governments, are needed to compete for these funds. To more effectively allocate resources and enhance the nation's transportation systems, a balanced approach is needed. The balanced approach should increase formula funds. Our roads and bridges continue to be in disrepair despite significant investments in recent years. For example, depending on the ownership, our road conditions receive a poor rating from 22 up to 47% of our roads. Local and county roads are by far in the worst condition, which threatens our economy as well, because over 1,500 miles of them are freight and truck routes. The third bucket is the critical role regions and MPOs play in the process. Regions ensure a data-driven approach occurs, including project selection for these formula-based funds that's over $1 billion annually. This includes sub-allocated programs such as the new carbon reduction program and the highly successful transportation alternatives program. Second, we convene and support communities to ensure they are taking advantage of the discretionary funding opportunities. Currently, we bring together communities in our region which predominantly fall into the Justice 40 designation to collaborate on projects and ideas and provide needed support. Regions also apply on behalf of local communities and pass those funds on to communities, which is what we've done with $10 million of this Safe Streets for All funding. Finally, we're a voice for local communities and the public regarding their infrastructure concerns and frustrations. One frustration was the lack of financial and technical ability to apply for these highly competitive funds. MDOT and the state of Michigan's infrastructure office have been strong partners for us locally. In fact, the MIO office has developed a program to write grant applications for communities through a regionally vetted program. So I'd like to conclude by thanking you for this opportunity and really acknowledging the important role that infrastructure is in Southeast Michigan and the role that regions play. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate your comments. Our fifth witness is Mike Aaron. Mike Aaron serves as the business manager for the Laborers Local 1191 and president of the Michigan Laborers District Council. He is certainly a very well-respected labor leader in his community. He also serves as vice president of the Metropolitan AFL-CIO and a board member on the mayor of Detroit's Detroit Employment Solutions Corporation. Mr. Aaron, welcome to the committee. We all look forward to your opening statement and appreciate your leadership on so many union issues and labor issues in general.
Well, thank you, Senator Peters, and I want to say thank you for the work that, thank you, Senator Peters, and I just want to say thank you for the work that you and this committee is doing on the infrastructure for Michigan as well as the United States. As you've heard, my name is Mike Aaron, and I'm the business manager of Laborers International Union Local 1181 located in Detroit, Michigan. The Michigan Laborers District Council represent more than 13,000 skilled trades persons in the state of Michigan. Laborers Local 1181 is one of 7 La Uno locals in the state. It is also the largest in the state of Michigan, representing more than 5,700 active construction skilled trades person in its geographic jurisdiction of Wayne and Macomb counties. local laborers 1191 members primarily work on building trades and heavy and highway and bridge construction projects. I have been a member of Laborers Local 1191 since 1984. I've been in the union administration leadership since 1988 for over 37 years, good, bad, or indifferent. As business manager of Laborers Local 1191, some of my duties consist of upholding the Constitution of the International Union Organization, managing the business affairs of Local 1191 Union, protecting the rights of members and laborers' jurisdiction on work projects, enforcing all collective bargaining agreements, and securing fair wages and benefits through organizing, policy support, and collective bargaining. A large part of my responsibility as business manager of Laborers Local 1181 is to vet and endorse policies and candidates that support the core principles of the organization. One of our core principles is one man, one job. This means our members should be able to take care of their families with the earnings from one job. This, among other reasons, is why Liona International and Local 1191 support the bipartisan infrastructure package. The package has supported large investments in highways, street, and bridge construction, which guarantee good paying jobs for the Local 1191 membership and the Michigan laborers. Most important to the construction industry and myself and my membership of the funds and the bipartisan infrastructure law are covered under the prevailing wage protection of Davis-Bacon Act. The Davis-Bacon Act is very important to labor. This means that billions of dollars are coming into municipalities to support investments in energy technologies that will help raise standards for workers and industries like charging infrastructure, electrical vehicles, and clean water infrastructure. The bipartisan package also created unprecedented investments in underserved communities and expand pathways to good paying jobs, especially for the underrepresented worker. We know with good paying jobs come the need for proper training. The law accounted for the need for training by creating training center partnerships, being labor unions and employers for the installation and maintenance of energy efficient building technologies. Surface transportation funds were also activated to create registered apprenticeship and pre-apprentice programs. Finally, and most importantly, municipalities and local governments are for the first time ever receiving federal funds to establish local hiring programs with economic or geographic preference to incentivize people living in these areas to pursue trade careers. I am very happy to be here today because from my perspective, the package was an easy piece of legislation for Local 1181 to get behind. It comes to positively impact every facet of my membership day-to-day lives. Thank you to this committee and Senator Peters.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Aaron, for those comments. Mr. Beefrick, I'm particularly excited to see the progress that it's made to restore the Michigan Central Station in Detroit. And I'm currently working to secure an additional $3 million in funding through the congressionally directed spending program to make Michigan Central an intermodal station again with passenger train service, which I think will be transformative in so many ways. MDOT received a corridor ID grant under the bipartisan infrastructure law, as you know, to begin planning how to extend passenger rail service into downtown Detroit and even across the border into Windsor. So my question for you is, once this planning process is over, I'm sure implementation funding is going to be needed to carry out this project. Could you please discuss the importance of Congress continuing to support the Corridor ID and federal state intercity rail program to enable train service like this?
Absolutely. And yeah, the Michigan Central opportunity that we have in front of us is extremely exciting. I'm a transportation person, obviously, but when I see the opportunity for us to be able to connect so many modes together, it just makes sense. So the idea at Michigan Central would be not only to have passenger rail service back through there, but also connect with our intercity bus systems along with the local transportation systems to create, and really build out and maximize our network as a whole. You mentioned the Corridor ID grants that we're very appreciative of. We actually have Corridor ID work, which is identification and development work that we're doing on all three of our passenger rail services from Grand Rapids and Port Huron and Detroit to Chicago. In addition, we're actually supporting an Ohio grant that's looking at traveling east out of Detroit down towards Toledo and Cleveland. So obviously, we've gotten through step one in the Corridor ID process in getting our grant agreements set up. Federal Rail, our FRA, has been extremely helpful. We have a very good working relationship with them. Look forward to continuing that. I think you mentioned the importance of continuing this. Yeah, we're in study phase right now. We're looking at the opportunities and what could be. But we are going to need the resources to be able to actually implement the things that we know will allow those projects to get completed, to opening the doors to greater reliability and better service and expanded frequencies. So we're very much looking forward to what's next, especially for the Detroit to Windsor connection that we're talking about, working with Amtrak and Canadians via as well. And we really look forward to that. I think one thing I would like to mention, and it is a bit of a challenge, is that there isn't any formula funding available for passenger rail. And as I'd mentioned in my opening remarks, the more certainty we have around that, the better we can be at planning and most efficiently actually delivering those projects. So thank you.
I just follow up. You mentioned about Windsor involved, which is interesting. Being on an international border makes it a particularly interesting project. But that could also add some complexity to everything. So my question for you is, has MDOT received sufficient interagency coordination to carry that out, particularly given the fact we've got an international border? And is there any additional support, either related to that or any additional support that Congress can lend?
Yeah, I really appreciate that offer, but to this point, we've actually had very good coordination, both with the federal partners and with our Canadian partners. So it's still a concept right now that's gaining momentum, and as we need assistance to help us with some barriers, we'll certainly reach out.
Great. Captain Lamar, the Port of Monroe is vital to the Great Lakes shipping network and the country's supply chain as a whole, and I don't need to tell you that. You tell me that every opportunity you get to do that, to ensure that efficient transportation of highly diversified cargo. You mentioned in your opening comments, limestone, asphalt, steel coils, wind energy components, the list can go on. And that's certainly why I was happy to support your $11 million award through the Port Infrastructure Development Program. It's also PIDP to drive the upgrades. But I understand that these improvements include the rehabilitation of operating areas responsible for exporting wind energy components, a key part of the Port of Monroe's operation as the county's only port host to wind manufacture. So my question for you, Captain Mars, could you expand on the ways in which the PIDP grant helps ensure a robust and resilient supply chain and ensures that the port can meet the growing freight volumes in critical sectors such as agriculture, construction, and clean energy infrastructure? You've got a lot on your plate.
Thank you, sir. We see the Port of Monroe as the gateway to Michigan ports. We're the first stop. As Michigan's gateway port, we believe that we're the front door to the intermodal transportation in the region. The infrastructure bill and what it will do through PIDP for the Port of Monroe will not only rehabilitate infrastructure that was constructed in 1932 when the port was created, but it will also expand our ability and connectivities to other modes. Ports in general, the Great Lakes state, of course, having more ports than any other state in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system, were built up in wartime above anything else. And the maritime industry as a whole is often overlooked because, quite frankly, we have such little impact on the public. People sit at rail crossings, they see trucks on the highway, the ships come and go in the night with the least environmental impact in existence to move the most tons per mile with the least environmental footprint. At the Port of Monroe, enhancing our ability to handle both domestic and international freight, and also bolster existing state and federal investment. As you mentioned, the Port of Monroe is home to the only wind tower manufacturer in the country located at a port. I can tell you that at the height of the pandemic, the Port of Monroe had its busiest season on record. And that was because the port, serving as a regional distribution hub for General Electric wind, was both manufacturing and sending out wind towers, but also bringing in additional wind towers from Canada, and also by rail, bringing in the hubs and nacelles and serving as a distribution point for all of those components. Having the ability to utilize the port's infrastructure, which in that case was funded through the state of Michigan, was critically important. And this investment will represent the single largest investment in the Port of Monroe's history. I speak to you today, though, not just as the Port of Monroe, but as the American Great Lakes Ports Association as a whole. And it will continue to be critically important, not only to renew the legislation, but to ensure that the Great Lakes are represented equitably with the coasts. Because as it stands, it's been a much smaller percentage that has gone to Great Lakes ports than that of our coastal competitors. However, while there's room for improvement, it undoubtedly is going to pave the way for the most significant enhancements that our port and others around the system have ever seen.
Right. There's no question we have to make sure our coast is represented there, and we'll continue to fight. I always say we have the East Coast, the West Coast, and the best coast.
Amen.
So we're gonna be fighting for
That
the
gets
best.
an amen for
We'll
sure.
be fighting for the best coast. Mr. Fittante, as you discussed in your testimony, the ability for rural areas to compete for federal funding can be very different from both suburban and urban jurisdictions. And the substance of the infrastructure needs themselves are also very different as well. So if you could expand for the committee on how infrastructure needs differ in the Upper Peninsula specifically, but also what types of infrastructure are most needed, and finally, how has the bipartisan infrastructure law supported those needs? And equally as important, what do we need to be doing in the future to build on what we have done so far?
Well, thank you, Senator. I guess I would look at it in two ways. I think, first of all, the act addressed some unique needs in the Upper Peninsula very well. We certainly have a need for broadband, as other communities do, but particularly acute in rural communities. And the act is followed on to some of the federal investment that's already making meaningful difference there. Additionally, when you look at what the act does around reclamation of mines, again, very important for the legacy that we have around abandoned mines. And then additionally, it provides for EV chargers. I think from our perspective, maybe there's a little bit different way to look at that type of investment and how that's unique to the Upper Peninsula. And as we look to electrify, what does that mean towards outdoor recreation, and what's going on with outdoor recreation mobility, and do you electrify trails along those ways? You know, we see, as I talked about population, great opportunity around water, climate, and outdoor recreation. And if you look at Bentonville, Arkansas, as an example of that, they credit their focus on outdoor recreation to attracting 1,000 new people a month to that community. And if Bentonville can do that, we should be eating their lunch in terms of what we have with regard to the topography, the geography, and the climate around outdoor recreation. Additionally, as you well know from, I think the last time we had a chance to talk in person, when you tried to fly into Marquette and struggled to get there to drop a puck at the NMU game, go Wildcats. Air service is a critical need that is really challenged regionally. And I think from our perspective, we've got to figure a way to address that issue because it is so critical. From our lens, it's not a transportation issue alone, it's really an economic development issue. And to get in and out of the Upper Peninsula right now, in light of what the current flight schedule looks like, in light of what the investment looks like, it's really a 3-day business trip. And as we try to develop business, as we try to attract business, that's largely a non-starter. And when I look at what we're doing around some sophisticated stuff with technology and entrepreneurship, we've got to figure out what a solution to air service looks like. And then additionally, I think the big difference for us regionally as opposed to other parts of the state is our state trunk lines, and thank you, Mr. Director, are in really good shape. It's our local roads that are really our challenge. And so what can we do to make that investment in our local roads to really kind of match what you see as you come into our communities? When you talk about what we can do to ensure that we're better able to compete, I'll offer you 3 different ideas quickly, Senator. First, good planning leads to good projects, and good projects get funded. The challenge for us is getting communities focused on planning and what they need rather than chasing whatever dollars may presently be in front of them. I think training communities on planning, prioritizing, and implementing efforts to help redevelop themselves is critical. Most rural cities, villages, and townships are short-staffed to start with, and let alone have a staff person focused on getting a municipality in a position to plan and implement the opportunity that's presently in front of them. And communities need technical assistance. And that was the case with that KKIL City of Menominee grant. They had to really a need for a grant writer, engineering firm to help define that project, compete, and submit the application. So I can certainly expand upon that later, Senator, but those certainly would put us in a pretty good position to compete.
Great, thank you, thank you. Ms. O'Leary, the RAISE grants authorized by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Program offered one of probably the more flexible, high-value opportunities for communities to fund complex and high-priority local projects. Southeast Michigan has received several RAISE grants, including $16 million for the city of Pontiac for the Pike Street Clinton River Trail Connector project, $8.5 million for electrical vehicle charging in Wayne County, and over $25 million for the city of Detroit to reconstruct a portion of Michigan Avenue with cutting-edge mobility technologies incorporated into that corridor. Could you speak to the importance of retaining the RAISE grant program in the next surface transportation reauthorization bill? And if you'd also share with the committee any recommendations you have to improve the program when we work to reauthorize that bill.
All right. Absolutely, thank you. So one of the great things about the RAISE program is that it is a way to fund large projects that the formula funding just can't do. And I think whether it was RAISE and infra, the importance for those large projects to be retained in reauthorization is critically important. The other thing, as you noted with what got funded in Southeast Michigan, is the variety. And transportation needs and solutions aren't singular, right? And so being able to allow for what makes sense in Pontiac may be different than what makes sense in Detroit. And so this does that, and we're very appreciative of that. I think another reason it was successful is it's a known program. It has been around a while. I think both administratively it's known, and also to the applicants it's known. So scaling it up was wise. It's not seen as a new program that people have to understand better. because it's such a large amount of dollars, I think the applicant is pretty flexible with doing their best with meeting timelines and other requirements. But I do think there are some things that we could do a little bit better. And one is, if partial funding is awarded, to really work with the applicant about what that means. Because it's so much money, even MDOT has trouble when it's partially funded, right? And they run the biggest program in Michigan. So when a smaller community would receive partial funding, their avenue to add to that pot is pretty limited. So that would be one recommendation. And the second would be just ensuring that the MPO is involved, and you all in your group, that you do a great job of making sure that you hear from the MPO for congressionally directed spending awards. And that goes back and forth in that we make sure that it's can get put in our transportation improvement program, our TIP, but also that it makes sense for our region, and that we're ready for the funds when they get here. So there are times when we see large funding announcements and we had no idea that they were happening in our region. So thank you.
Right. Well, thank you. Mr. Aaron, as you mentioned in your opening comments, the Davis-Bacon Act requires contractors and subcontractors to pay workers employed on federal projects no less than the local prevailing wage and benefits received by those doing similar work on similar projects in the area. This is something I feel very strongly about as well, and worked very aggressively to include in the bipartisan infrastructure package to make sure that those projects were subject to the law and we had good paying jobs being created. But for the committee's benefit, could you describe how the Davis-Bacon Act requirements have been applied on transportation infrastructure projects here in Michigan since the passage of the law, and what impact that these provisions have on your members? What does this mean to a member of your union and other unions across the state?
Well, thank you for the question. The Davis-Bacon Act requires on these transportation infrastructure projects flowing from this bipartisan package has helped to ensure fair treatment and appropriate compensation for my members and all trade persons that work on these projects. These requirements also help make for keep the level playing field for the contractor that bid on these projects. It makes sure that these contractors are paying their workers the same. That means that they are properly classified when paying these workers. They pay them steadily. This means a lot to our membership and all tradespersons that's working under this infrastructure package. The reporting of these employers that they have to make on a weekly basis to the Department of Labor, that what wages they are paying and what classification that they are paying these wages under. And I must say that the Davis-Bacon wage is really a big thing for my membership, because the Davis-Bacon wage is slightly higher than our normally collective bargaining wage that we have for this area. So my members and some of the other tradespersons members is making more money than they have ever made. So this is very important to our members and their families, that they are paid weekly, the playing field is level, and they are paid properly, and they have to account for it.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Mr. Aaron. My next question is going to kind of go to all of you, and anyone can jump in any order that you'd like. I've often heard from stakeholders that a lack of grant writing experience and capacity, as well as just basic knowledge of federal programs, is perhaps the primary barrier to assessing federal funding that we're talking about now with all the benefits. But it only benefits you if you actually can get it and get it awarded to you. And I know some of you have actually mentioned this in your testimony already. And that's why I've introduced the Streamlining Federal Grants Act to direct all agencies to make just to make the process easier to understand and to apply for. Shouldn't have specialized training. You should be able to get this, particularly if you're in an underserved or rural community. It's difficult to have that kind of expertise, and they need assistance, clearly. So if each of you could expand on how the need for technical assistance has impacted communities and how your organization has attempted to address that need, and what should Congress be doing? So it's open to any or all of you who would like to jump in. Ms. O'Leary, you want to jump in first?
Sure, thank you. Great question. I think one of the biggest challenges of the bipartisan infrastructure law has been the ability and the capacity to be able to access the funds. When it comes to local capacity assistance, I know that the federal government does their best, forms federal navigators, and that funds a couple communities maybe in each state to be able to receive that kind of assistance. But even that isn't what needs to happen. The state doesn't have the capacity or the local knowledge to serve in this role, but regions across the country do. We bring communities together for all types of reasons, and they trust us. We see the big picture, but we also understand their local priorities. And one example is bringing together the Justice 40 communities to make sure that they can understand what those opportunities are. So when we look at the challenges, it's understanding the opportunity, the match, the grant writing, the contractor selection, the grant reporting, all of those feed into it. Communities can't afford $20,000 to $100,000 to apply for a grant. SEMCOG just applied for the climate pollution reduction grant and spent $40,000 to not be successful, right? And that happens, but it's a lot of money. The Michigan Infrastructure Office is a good start. Formula funds can help avoid some of this because, we're able to pass it through. Part of my PL or my planning dollars, I pass through directly to local communities to do local planning to support our regional priorities. So we're passing some of the funds through ourselves, as I mentioned, with the Safe Streets for All grant, but also from some of the GLRI money that we have. And one of the things we're doing now is adding money in there to help do contractor selection and procurement for the communities and assistance with the inspection of the property during construction, as well as the reporting requirements for them if they don't have the capacity to do that. Thanks.
Anyone else? Captain Lamar?
Those were excellent comments because the port community through PIDP and the Port of Monroe shares very similar sentiments. While the funding is outstanding, I always say to my team when applying for grant funds, there is only free cheese in a mousetrap. And so the regulatory process that you can undergo throughout all of this can be very tasking. And there are a couple of key points to make here. You mentioned Justice 40, and I think that's very important because the Port of Monroe is within a Justice 40 community, and one of the barriers to entry is not just the grant writing costs that are incurred, which of course those costs are public dollars. It's also the administration if you were to get the grant, but the local match component for distressed communities is a barrier to entry. And for smaller ports, the local match component has been a barrier to entry. Thankfully, the Port of Monroe has had the support of Governor Whitmer and our director of MDOT to answer the call as it relates to the local match funding for our PIDP grant. But many other ports cannot. And the recurring costs of the process is also another component. We have created, and hearing streamlining and grants in the same sentence when you're talking about legislation just like gets me excited. So streamlining that process, because what we've created is a cottage industry of regulating, monitoring, reporting, and following up on the funds that we received. And what we want to see is the efficient and cost-effective implementation of these grants but also the construction of that infrastructure. We want to see the public dollar go as far as possible, and the current process needs improvement.
Great. Mr. Weaver?
Sure. Obviously, Ms. O'Leary and the captain did a wonderful job of explaining this, but just to put kind of the state DOT perspective in there, you know, we think of ourselves as a pretty robust agency with a lot of resources, but we actually have hired assistants in there in getting expertise on the grant writing narratives, on the cost benefit analysis, on a lot of the administrative stuff that it really takes to really be successful. For the locals, we do provide letters of support. We're a pass-through for some of the funding that comes through. So we work very closely with folks on that, but we don't have the ability to be that bigger resource. Thankfully, like we mentioned before, we do have the Michigan Infrastructure Office that has a technical assistance program for local units of government and planning organizations, tribal organizations, to be able to help draw that infrastructure money to Michigan. So not really saying a whole lot more new, but just, again, from the state perspective.
Great, thank you. Mr. Fonte?
Senator, if I could just briefly add, to the captain's point, we've been caught in that mousetrap. And so we actually had to, as I provided in my written testimony, return $950,000 to the state. Critical opportunity for our region. It was all around workforce development. And unfortunately, it was pass-through dollars. And we just could not, after nearly a year of sustained effort, figure out how to navigate that to get those dollars in partnership to one of the 6 higher education institutions in the UP. And I think the points have been well made. Let me just offer you one example of where I think opportunity is, and it really gets to the point Ms. O'Leary made about empowering regions. We've been fortunate to have a great partnership with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and have been entrusted with some funds from them that are really not prescriptive. Part of what we've done with that is to try to tackle this issue around capacity and technical assistance. And in partnership with Northern Michigan University, we pushed $200,000 into a partnership that essentially creates a fellows program, where we take a master's level student, we pay that student on behalf of a local municipality or a nonprofit, and we embed them with that nonprofit or local municipality. CDEM does something similar. And so I think to the extent that you can empower regions through non-prescriptive ways and help to provide that funding, we are really in a cost-effective way, able to help tackle that challenge. And I think this is a new, but just one example of kind of the approaches we're looking at. And I think the Office of Rural Development here in the state, give Governor Whitmer so much credit for establishing that office. You know, one of only 2 in the country at the time it was established, are doing a lot of similar approaches for really cost-effective return.
Yeah, good, very good. Mr. Riefrich, as you know, a key part of achieving our service transportation goals is also investing in transit systems, which is why the bipartisan infrastructure law provided historic support for transit agencies. In particular, I have championed the no and low emissions bus grant program, as well as the bus and bus facilities grant programs, which were expanded under the legislation tenfold. In Michigan, these programs not only benefit our environment and transit-reliant communities, but they also support manufacturing jobs here in Michigan in the commercial vehicle supply chain, which is significant. Recently, over $72 million in funding for bus transit was announced for our state, going to Detroit, Ann Arbor, Grand Haven, and Fulton, Michigan. So my question for you is, would you please describe what MDOT's role has been in supporting these transit agencies from the state's perspective, and any recommendations on how we should move forward with these programs?
Yeah, certainly. We're very involved with 3 of those. I will say the Fulton one was actually a tribal transit grant that's direct to the tribe, the Nottawasapi Huron-Band of Potawatomi. But for the Detroit, Ann Arbor, Grand Haven, the state will be providing the match for those. And we will also be working closely with those entities to make sure that they're following the federally compliant procurement procedures. You know, we kind of go back to some of the rules and regulations. If you don't use them all the time, there's things that locals are going to need is support to make sure that, that things don't get jeopardized. So we're very happy that we got these, these urban agencies that have received these Lono grants. We will say, however, that we have tried to support some of the local or the rural agencies. And we've kind of coordinated an application, a single state DOT coordinated application for the rural agencies. We've talked to FTA, tried to get advice about what's going to be competitive, and we just haven't gotten there yet. So the urbans, it's great. Obviously not a lot of need for that infrastructure, but we're also looking for ways on how we can help the local rural agencies be successful in the implementation of alternate fuel vehicles.
Thank you. Captain Amaro, I want to follow up on your point about the Great Lakes receiving more PIPD funding. As you're well aware, millions of tons of maritime cargo are moved through our Great Lakes ports. However, as you mentioned, in the 2023, the Great Lakes ports received only 2% of the PIDP grants nationwide, despite this tremendous volume coming through. So, Captain Lamar, can you expand on why it's essential that Great Lakes ports start receiving their fair share of this program, and what changes MARAD and Congress should consider to make this possible?
You're getting my heart going, sir.
I know.
So
We gotta
here we go.
Get your adrenaline moving.
Yes, sir. You better believe it. The reason that the Great Lakes should receive their fair share of port infrastructure development program funding is that we are talking about the heartland of America's transportation network. We are talking domestic goods that are critical to keeping our economy going. While investment in our coastal ports is important, investment in an unbalanced manner, to the extent that it is subsidizing a foreign transportation network. Ultimately, we are subsidizing the infrastructure to bring in Toshiba TVs versus moving Michigan soybeans. Ultimately, the Great Lakes, whether it is a set aside and or an equitable percentage, should be on a level playing field with the coast. We are American manufacturing, we are American flag shipping, and it's very important to look at what are the induced effects, what are the geopolitical implications, and what are the outcomes to the general public? How are these dollars ultimately affecting American citizens across the dock in the towns that they live in?
Thank you. Mr. Fitanti. I was so pleased to support the city of Menominee's application for a RAISE grant award of over $21 million for the Port of Menominee, operated by KK Integrated Logistics. It included the installation of rail infrastructure that was needed to transport freight from the harbor to customers all around that region. The Port of Menominee is a key gateway for renewable energy into the Midwest after making a significant investment to handle the wind energy shipments coming in there. So my question for you, sir, is could you speak to how success of this grant and the Port of Menominee opens commerce to rural areas all through the upper Midwest, but in particular to Michigan's great and wonderful Upper Peninsula? And also, what lessons do you think future UP RAISE grant programs can learn from that successful application? How can we replicate that?
So unfortunately, Senator, when we talk about capacity, we were not alongside the city of Menominee and KKL for this grant other than supporting it where we could. But the real work was done by both the city and KKL and Cynthia and her team. And I think the lesson that I take away is you have really dynamic leadership there, particularly with Cynthia Cooper. And as you're traveling on your Harley, I really urge you to visit and hear the story of how they persevered through just a devastating fire. It is absolutely worth your time to hear that firsthand. In addition to the remarks I made, Senator, in my comments about what the grant will do, let me offer you 5 other specifics. It'll enable Menominee to improve and expand the port and the dock wall. It enables berthing of multiple vessels simultaneously versus vessels having to wait and anchor at another port. It increases opportunity for increased commerce in the port, benefiting the immediate and surrounding economies and businesses. Of course, it increased commerce equates to increased jobs and employment opportunities at KKIL and other supporting supplier companies. Additionally, it will benefit related uses at the KKIL dock to support Fincantieri Marine, the largest employer in the region. 42% of its workforce comes from the Michigan side, and therefore the U.S. Navy and DoD. Fincantieri has partnered with KKIL for decades to dock vessels on their dock during times of overcapacity and launches. And then lastly, the improvements the grant makes possible enable KKIL to transport increased levels of cargo on waterways and rails, decrease truck transportation, thereby decreasing CO2 emissions.
Right, right. Ms. O'Leary, the law provides a number of types of funding, as you well know, formula and discretionary grants, some of which, though, can be applied for regionally or locally. Would you please discuss some of the advantages and disadvantages of programs allowing regional or local applications instead of solely through the State Department of Transportation? And do you think that the bipartisan infrastructure law strikes the right balance on this front? Our director may want to hear this answer.
I know, right? Well, I want to say.
He's
first-
taking notes right now.
Yeah. First, I want to say MDOT's a great partner to SEMCOG and to the regions, really and truly they are. That being said, I think there are benefits to directly allocating funds, both the formula funds through TAP and carbon reduction, as well as the discretionary opportunities such as Safe Streets for All. When it comes to certain issues, such as safety on our local roadways, our communities know those issues the best. And so being able to work directly for applying for the funds or having that sub-allocation process is really a huge benefit. One of the disadvantages, like we've talked about, is really the cost to apply. From a regional perspective, it's been interesting because some of the programs, once the locals receive the funding, aren't required to be in the TIP, even though they're federal funds. So sometimes for regions, it's hard to know, again, what got funded. We as staff really work as the region to work one-on-one when we have those sub-allocated funds. So for TAP or carbon reduction, we go out and meet with communities, talk about the programs, and be able to provide that technical assistance in a better application. And then we, as a region, have an elected official board that make all of those grant decisions for us. I think that is harder to do at the state level.
Great, thank you. Mr. Aaron, as we've discussed today, the infrastructure law invests in a broad range of projects employing many trades, including the ones you represent. It also, though, which I think is significant, for the first time ever, allowed the use of surface transportation funds for the establishment of registered apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship programs. The need for skilled workers is critical right now for the success of this project as well as for our economy. So my question for you, sir, is how are different unions, building trades, operating engineers, laborers, and all of our trades working to create and strengthen workforce pipeline for these projects, including using these funds for apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship programs so we have more workers able to do this critical work?
Well, first of all, I would like to acknowledge that the building trades, including the laborers, understand the unique challenges construction employers have and is facing with meeting their job demands. But I feel, and I believe labor feels, the building trades, the answer to these challenges that employers face is and has always been registered apprenticeships. All of the Michigan building trades, including the laborers, offer DOL-approved registered apprenticeships training. These apprenticeship programs not only get employers the high-skilled labor they need, that they also give people the skills they need to feed their family and maintain their place or achieve their place in the middle class. It's the most proven career pipeline for tomorrow's more diverse, and equitable workforce. Currently, the building trades, got apprenticeships, applications for general laborers, cement masons, bricklayers, carpenters, electrical workers, plumbers, pipe fitters, operator engineers, painters, sheet metal workers, roofers, and we all are doing our best to get that career tradesperson in our industry. And these things can happen if we continue to have the investment in skilled labor flowing from these federal dollars coming into the state of Michigan to help get these apprenticeships off the ground.
Yeah, great. And I want to have that as one of our main takeaways for especially our friends in the media are here.
Yes.
These are great jobs. The skilled trades
These
are
are
great
great-
jobs. They pay great wages. You have openings in these jobs. Your country needs you. These are places for young people if you're looking at a future going into the trades.
Careers.
These are careers that are great careers that provide good income. And you can go immediately to work. So hopefully we get more folks in that area. We need it from the UP to Monroe and everywhere in between is where we need skilled workers right now. So I'm going to wrap now, and I want to thank all of you. But I got one kind of final question for all of you as we wrap it up. I want to kind of put this all together because the reason we came here together was to think about what has the bipartisan infrastructure law, what has been helpful. So I'd like you all to answer just one thing, what you believe to be the single most significant benefit of the infrastructure law so far. It's done a lot. We've talked about a lot of issues, but I'd be curious as to what each of you think was the most significant benefit of the law. And this is really important, what outstanding need is there from your perspective that this committee should keep in mind when we're reauthorizing? So this was a start. I think we've got a lot to talk about. You did. It's very successful. But where do we go from here? What is the need do you think is still out there that hasn't been met adequately, or one that hasn't even been addressed at all? Give us some perspective. You just I know this is hard to distill both of those to one, but I think it would be helpful. So I guess we'll start with you again, Mr. Director.
Certainly. Thank you. And it's a great question and a lot to think about. I think most significantly, obviously, the IIJA had many facets to it, but for us, it allowed us to get to projects that we otherwise would have never gotten to. We mentioned the Lafayette Bridge, we mentioned I-375. It allowed us to actually think about what could be. Now, obviously, there's more need out there than just the few projects that we mentioned. So I think going forward, and I don't know necessarily if it's outstanding, but we need to make sure that the investment continues so that we do have that long-term look for planning and efficiency, but also really the long-term, what you've mentioned earlier about streamlining process. The more we can streamline process and make it most efficient for all, that's how we're going to most efficiently deliver work for the taxpayer.
Captain Lamar?
Yes, sir. To expand on the director's comments, to me, the single most important piece of this is lasting improvement with the public dollar. This bill was bipartisan. Infrastructure is bipartisan. It will stand the test of time. It will reap public benefit far after the investment has been made. It is apolitical. It doesn't ebb and flow with the geopolitical ebb and flow of cargo and or transportation. It's critical to our success as a nation. Your support of this legislation has been priceless. And I would say the last most, well, it's not the second most important thing, because at the end of the day, thank you is the single most important piece of this day. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, I think, from all of us. And it's on us as well to work together, all of our agencies within the state of Michigan, to fortify the message. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Infante?
Thank Thank you, Senator. Echo the captain's comments about maybe the most important thing being appreciation for what you've done. And since he talked about the bipartisan nature, I'll stand to my comments before and instead say, you know, as I mentioned, we know what it's like to be caught in that mousetrap and lose out. And I can give you another example. We really felt the Recompetes program that was in place was really well suited for a region like ours, coal community, and once again, couldn't qualify. So I think what I find most heartening about this legislation is its diversity, including its application for rural regions. And so thank you for that. But that's not to say that it's easy to get there. And so the one takeaway as you move forward, I think that I would urge you and your colleagues to consider is, to Ms. O'Leary's point, trust the regions, take the bureaucracy out of our way, and trust your local partners. We can administer the program in a cost-effective way that knows the community and to be able to deliver the opportunity. And if you can't do that, because I know it's difficult, then work to ensure that we've got that technical assistance and capacity on the ground in some way to further take advantage of this opportunity.
Right, yeah, great, thank you. Ms. O'Leary.
I'm lucky to be going fourth. Those were great answers. To add something different, I would say one of the most significant benefits was really the recognition of safety as being core to that legislation. And it's not just the fact that it was able to get that money down locally, which was vitally important, but, you know, we all have that mantra nationally. And I think being able to continue to push the dialogue about safety first is, you know, so important for this country. I think when we look at what outstanding need there is, it's not sexy, but road and bridge funding, you know, what the director was able to do was be able to apply for those discretionary funds, which allowed some freeing up the funds to do some of the roads and bridges that we needed to do. But that's so vital. We talked about 46% of the roads are in poor condition still in our region, and those are freight roads, not just subdivision roads. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to really look at that investment. Thank you.
Great. And Mr. Aaron, you get the last word. I know a place.
At here,
But it's a place you feel very comfortable having the last word, so.
well, I think the local hire piece and its requirements really speak volumes, and if we can keep that going, because you know, my local has benefited, and its membership has benefited from the local hire piece. Contractors call our office for skilled workers, and as well as workers that is embedded in those communities that the work is being performed in. And it's a wonderful thing to see a person get an opportunity to get a good paying job with benefits to provide and sustain their family and help build their communities, because at the same time, these people are buying lunch in their community, they're buying fuel in their community, they're help building their community. And that means a lot to these people. And, you know, once these jobs are over, they go on to other careers in the industry. So as we say, these are careers of what they are learning, and they don't have the debt that go along with these careers. You earn a livable, sustainable wage to sustain a family with benefits. To have that opportunity is huge. Thank you, Senator. Thank you for the work that you all are doing and will do to maintain this program.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Aaron, and appreciate those comments. It was a good way to wrap up this hearing. But before I close, I just want to thank the Lansing City Council President, Jeremy Garza. I think Jeremy was here in the audience, and Mayor Andy Shore for letting us use their chambers here today, and for the opportunity to have this discussion. But I also want to thank our witnesses. Thank you. Thank you to all of you for coming in and taking a piece of all of your very, very busy schedules to offer this testimony, to give us your perspective. This is something that we're going to be continuing to work on for months and years ahead. This is not a job that is finished. It's nowhere near being finished. We've got a lot of work to do. I think I heard loud and clear from each of you that this was a meaningful step forward, and there's much to be happy about, but we also understand that it's a work in progress, and we all have to lock arms together at all levels of government, all partisanships, everything, put all of that aside. And ultimately, as Mr. Aaron said, this is all about people as well, and it's in the best interest of people and our communities as to why we make these investments collectively across all levels of government. And as taxpayers, though, they expect money to be used efficiently and thoughtfully and effectively, and having these oversight hearings allow us to continue to that work that all of you do each and every day. So thank you. The hearing record will remain open for 4 weeks. Any senators who wish to submit questions or statements for the records should do so within 2 weeks by August 6th. Witnesses will then have 2 weeks or until August 20th to respond to any questions that may be follow-up questions to you. With that, this hearing is now adjourned.